Hey, there we are. Hey guys, sorry for the delay. We're having some technical difficulties, which is pretty common because I have an ancient laptop. But anyway, we are here in a cool new setting. I got my friend Brando with me, um,
Hello.
and we'll get to him in a second. But first, as we always do, we're going to start the show off with some whiskey. Um, it's always, I don't know how much you know about what I do, but I always I grab a new whiskey, something I've never had before.
Okay.
Um, and sometimes I just like the name. So this one is called Copper Dog. It's actually a Space Side Scotch. For those of you who don't know, there's all sorts of regions in Scotland where different scotches come from. Speyside happens to be one of those. But this one, the Copper Dog, actually refers to a little pipe that the distillers would hide in their pants so that they could steal a dram whenever they wanted. So even though it has a cute little dog on the label, that's not really what it was. But
Oh,
yeah, so this one's 80 proof. It's a blended malt Scotch, and I can't pronounce the hotel where they distill it because can you
what is it
pronounce
called?
that?
The I don't want to mess
Yeah.
it up.
You know what? Gaelic is
The
probably one of the hardest things anyone ever.
Cragalash.
The
I don't know.
the Craiglang.
I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to
All I can say is
butcher the
Sonja.
name.
That's the only thing I can say. So this is what I like to do when I'm tasting: is first smell it from the bottle, like you get a nose on it, and
Thank you. Yeah, this is
yeah,
a new one for me. I haven't heard of this one.
mm-hmm, yeah. What
Very
do you
nice.
get? Any notes? What do you get from it? This is always
I
fascinating
was
to me.
wondering if it was going to be have that sort of peaty kind of
Hmm.
peat moss, but it seems to be much more of a smooth.
Yeah, it doesn't. You're right. It doesn't come off as peaty. There's some. I get like kind of flowery notes in the nose. I have a really sensitive nose, so I can
Oh,
often pick up things with my nose that I won't necessarily pick up
yeah,
when I put
there
it in
was
a
a definitely
glass.
a sweetness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then I do have a little glass that I
Thank you.
use. Yeah. Um, and then I do the nose test again too when I have it in the glass and see. Um,
Let it.
it's yeah. It's got it's it's not overly viscous, so there's not, you it's kind of what you do with wine, right? You swirl it around, see if it's got legs. This one's not doesn't seem to have that. But I do get a little flowery sweetness from this one. So then when oh, there's a little bit of burn on the
A
nose,
little bit. I
right?
just
Yeah.
noticed that when you said it,
A little
a
bit
little
of
bit
a
like a
burn.
vodka that kind of,
Hmm.
but it
Um,
smells very smooth.
It
Kind of.
does. I don't think it's going to be as peaty as a lot of scotches. So then what you do, or what I've learned, and what I do, is you take it in your mouth and kind of hold it on the roof of your mouth for a second just to get a taste for the flavors on your entire tongue.
Okay,
And then you feel the finish. So let's go for it. Oh,
that sounds.
cilantro.
I'm learning. I'm learning.
Hmm. Mm. It's pretty
Okay,
mellow. A little bit of honey.
that's
Oh,
very mellow.
the finish, there's like a split second of a burn. It's not really peaty.
It
What
reminds
do
me
you,
more, and I'm not that well versed in whiskey, but it reminds me kind of more of a like a bourbon or Tennessee or
Oh yeah, you're totally
it
right. Eh,
really smooth. Yeah, I'm just very used to. I used to be really
Or
into the Lagavulin. I think it's like
mhm.
an Isla, the really peaty ones.
Oh yeah.
But this being a Scotch is
Islas are really peaty. Yeah, and I'm still learning too. I mean, it could be right that space sides generally aren't as peaty as some of the other regions. I don't know. I'll
yeah.
have to look that up. But it's actually really good. I think for someone who wants to get into Scotch, this could be kind of a mellow
It's not
entry into
scary,
it.
this one.
No, Jonas doesn't really like Scotch very much because he doesn't like that peaty,
Gotcha.
but he probably would drink this one.
Yeah, it's
So,
really smooth. I like
yeah,
this, especially drinking it straight.
yeah,
It's perfect. It doesn't need
yeah. It
ice or
doesn't need
water at
ice
all.
or water at all. I agree. That's awesome. All right, I'm gonna check in. We got a few. So, uh, and ladies. Oh, your friend said, "What are we drinking tonight, fellas and ladies?" My friend Pete wants me to let you know that this tonight's episode is brought to you by the I Want to Believe channel on YouTube. So thanks, Pete. We appreciate that. Um, so great. Thanks for sipping some of this with me. You know, like sometimes people are totally not into whiskey,
No,
and it's
I
kind of
like it.
fun.
I just need to. I'm not that well educated in it,
Yeah.
but
Well,
especially this, drinking it straight, being able to drink it straight, it's really smooth. It's
yeah.
really light and
I
enjoyable.
still consider myself a novice. So,
Okay.
but the funny thing is I went straight to Scotch, which is really unusual. I think it's a genetic thing.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
even though I'm Irish, all of my family, like all of my great uncles, grandparents, everyone drinks
I heard
Scotch.
they were drinking like Glenlivet.
Yeah, Glenlivet. That's what I usually drink, but lately I haven't been able to afford it, so I just find I find other stuff, right? But
Well, they've gone up like crazy. I remember
uh,
when I used to be into it. I just for some reason I just loved the legato. I think it was the bottle too. It just looked like
oh,
something that fell off of a pirate ship or something.
oh yeah,
And I used to buy them for back in on the East Coast for like $60 a
oh,
bottle. And
oh,
now they're like 250 or
oh yeah,
it's
oh
getting harder to
yeah.
come
Well,
by.
and I mean, it depends on how many years they've been aged. The Glenlivet that is aged in rum casks, that's my favorite. I don't know
Oh
if
yeah.
you've ever tried that, but it's a really cool blend of the peaty, like that really kind of harsh kind of flavor with the sweetness of rum. It's a really cool experience. If you ever see that and try it, or I'll next time we hang out, I'll bring some over.
Yeah, that
But
sounds it's very interesting that I think that's what's so fascinating about it is that you can so much work is put in over years for such subtle differences.
right, and I've always loved, like, it's such a personal experience too. Yeah, and I guess
Yeah.
even wine can be that, but wine's a different thing. But I think with whiskeys and scotch, people taste it. Like you can have 10 people all tasting this and you'll get different notes. It'll be something a completely different experience for you. And but in a good way,
Yeah.
right? And that's what I love about whiskeys and scotches. I think
Kind of
they're
like wine, but it goes even deeper, I think,
yeah,
in a way.
no, I know. I'm trying to
Not
find
not
the
to
right
insult
word
wine.
for that. Exactly. I was like, I don't want to insult my wine drinkers, but I do think it is kind of on a deeper level. It's a different crowd of people, to be
Mm.
honest, I think, right? The kind of people like me and you talking about weird stuff that drink whiskey. Different than wine drinkers. I'm just saying,
True,
right?
true,
I,
true. I
I
think
really think that.
I mean, this is a first for me. I haven't paired talking about weird things with whiskey, but the more you talk about it, it's starting to already make sense. So
Right? Like this is how I always imagined, you sit around with a bunch of really yeah, an eclectic group of people, kind of, whatever, eccentric, however you want to call them, and you just sip whiskey and you talk about whatever weird stuff comes up. That sounds awesome to me, right? Like,
yeah, it
right?
makes sense. Whiskey for me, what I noticed, and I'm even more of a novice than if you're a novice,
Yeah.
but it feels very uh gives you a kind of very consistent kind of, some drinks
Hmm.
you feel a buzz right away, then you feel whiskey gives you a very consistent kind of calm,
Yeah.
steady buzz,
Yes.
I could say,
Yeah.
that
It's
is
kind of
conducive to
it,
conversation.
it, it absolutely. I've always found that it just mellows me just enough, and I can
Mm.
have, they call it sometimes 2 fingers, 3 fingers, however
Oh
they
yeah.
measure it with fingers, right? A couple fingers, and just sip on it for an hour or so, and it just levels me out. Like, just it kind of takes away the stuff you're thinking about, but it doesn't make you feel out of control. No, I think it's
It's
perfect.
like in the movies, when there was always some stressful office scene, they was sit down and pour
Right?
whiskey.
Pour whiskey, right? Yeah, that's
We can
really
still
true.
focus on the problem, but we just relax a
We
little
just
bit. But
That's
yeah,
right. That is really true. Yeah, that's funny.
it's really good.
It's
But thank you.
it's
Thanks for
always
bringing
oh,
this.
absolutely. You're welcome. So we should get a move on. Start talking about you and some of the cool stuff. Like you and I, so Brando and I were neighbors for a while, and we just we met and started chatting and had some similar interests. And of course, you know me, I always tell people that I'm into weird stuff like ghosts and Bigfoot and stuff. Uh, and I love it when I meet people like Brando who are like, "Hey, ooh, I have some really good stories too." So we've been chatting about this literally since the first time we ever probably hung out.
Yeah, pretty
That you
much.
should come on the show with me and kind of tell your story. So we shared a little bit of your bio, but tell us a little bit about yourself, just really quickly, and where you are now, and however you want to, how it makes sense to go back to some of the other stuff in your life.
Sure. I'll give a summary because it's kind of complicated.
Yeah.
I I was born in California, and my parents they're both from Europe.
Hmm.
And my father was he was involved in sort of international business and then also diplomacy. He
Okay.
was an Italian diplomat actually from Italy, working in the U.S. and in Central America. So I grew up um, as an American, but we moved around quite a lot.
Hmm.
And I lived on the East Coast for a long time in New York City as a teenager, and also then in Connecticut. I went to the University of Miami, then the one in Florida, not in Ohio. Um, and I actually then, right after that, went into acting.
Okay.
So I
Yeah.
became a trained first stage actor, and I was doing a lot of theater in New York. And I slowly started to work my way into film, and then voiceover became a big sort of a breadwinner for me for a while.
Yeah. You do have a good voice.
Thank you.
You know. Yeah.
It's a trained voice. But uh, so that's kind of my background, and then the last few years, a lot of turbulence. I'm I'm someone like some of my friends too that we moved up here to Idaho, and during the pandemic,
Hmm.
wanting to just finally get out of the big city. So I've always been interested in the arts, acting, storytelling. So since a kid, I've had a lot of fantasy. And I guess going back for a moment more to my childhood, we moved around a lot, and I
Hmm.
lived in uh, California, the East Coast, and we lived in Europe and Italy for a while. I lived in the UK, and then also in Uruguay and in Nicaragua. And my father, being a diplomat, sometimes when I was a kid, we got to stay in one of these sort of embassy residences, which were
Hmm.
usually like a nice old house. And so between these experiences, I always had a lot of fantasy, and we traveled a lot, and I was sometimes just exposed to very interesting places, very ancient places in Europe, but
Oh
also
yeah.
interesting, unique places in South America, and I just sort of gave me a kind of a very explorative mindset.
Hmm.
Everything from history to the esoteric to mysteries to
Hmm.
science fiction. Um, and I guess being an actor too to kind of even supercharge that a little
Yeah.
bit. So
Yeah.
that's kind of, you can ask me anything. It's
Right.
just complicated because we moved around a
No.
lot, but that's
Yeah.
generally kind of
Yeah. No,
my
I
my
think
background.
that's great. That's helps out the viewers a little bit just to kind of be introduced to you. It's funny, like when you think about why, like when I talk about I'm weird and I'm into these things that are really fascinating to me, and why is that, right? But I think, I mean, you've kind of thought about this a little bit. I think it's the same for me. Like
Mm,
I moved around a lot. I was a military dependent. I was
yeah.
born in England. I had,
Oh,
and
oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
You're a army brat. I'm a
yeah,
diplo
yeah,
brat, I
I'm
think
an
is what
Air Force,
Air Force brat.
but yeah, but I think there's something about being exposed to the world in general as a young person that kind of expands your mind a little bit. Like
Yeah,
you're more interested perhaps, and again, this isn't putting anyone down. People are who they are, and we all have the experiences that we have, but you have to, when you move around, you have to be open to lots of things.
yeah,
That's how you make friends when you're a kid.
yeah.
So all of that, so it's kind of, it's interesting to kind of see those parallels between some of the things you and I might have experienced as young people and just being exposed to things that a lot of people aren't exposed to, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it kind of fosters that mindset a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
because I've heard of this one term. They often refer to military brat. There's a nicer word, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's totally, it's an
um,
acronym. I don't remember what it is, but it doesn't
we
offend
keep
me.
saying brat over and over again. But
I can be a brat. Yeah.
we're just sneaky brats.
Yeah.
Um, but I think I heard this term third culture kid, which is often applied to, it's like kids have to
Huh.
make their own kind of culture, develop
Mm.
their own kind of mindset if you move schools, you move countries, or because those kids that just grew up in that, they're going to have their mindset, and you have to be open to switch mindsets to kind of make those new friends, to kind of,
Yeah.
so I think it opens up a certain space where you're forced to, in a way, to have to
Mm-hmm.
be very open-minded, but then it becomes like a skill, like
Mm-hmm.
it fosters curiosity, and
Yeah.
to venture more and more into the unknown, in a way. I think
Uh,
it kind of,
Absolutely. Well, I just have a thought 'cause this happens to me all the time when I want to show. But and I believe in reincarnation. I think that we've all been here multiple times before.
mm,
So I just had that thought about who we are and what our lessons are and the kind of souls who are more prepared for that. I mean, I have met people that I feel like if they had lived my life, it would have felt traumatic to them.
mhm.
Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah,
and the idea of moving outside, and maybe it would have been different had they been younger, but it's always just fascinating to think about, am I who I am because I did those things, or was I already this person and that's why I did those things? It's, I don't
yeah,
know,
that's an
it's
interesting,
I don't see, this is my mind. I could, anyway. Uh
that's a big subject. I
it
know what you
is,
mean.
but yeah, and we'll move on past that, but that's where my brain went. But I know you've had some experiences, so you and I have talked about that. You've done some paranormal investigating
I
yourself.
have, I have.
So, does
It
it,
was very amateurish, but
well, we all start somewhere,
I
right?
did, and I would have continued to had,
Mm-hmm.
just life and having
Mm-hmm.
to work, figure things out. Um, but I haven't. I even think one of my buddies in the comments, Alex, I think he's there.
Oh yeah.
He from the East Coast.
Oh sweet.
We did some of that together too. We were in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and it started with some of these experiences I had earlier in childhood, which we
Yeah.
talked a little bit about.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to share some of those with the?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I suppose the most I'll share, I guess, the most impactful experience that I did have was, because I mentioned before, we moved to South America. We were in Uruguay
Mm-hmm.
for a little bit, and my my father was stationed there for 2 years, and I was about 10 or 11. Um, and I can go into detail, but just the general gist of the story was that he was stationed there. We were able to live in this residence.
Mm-hmm.
It was a beautiful, larger house built in the 1880s, because Uruguay at that time was very it was very prosperous. It was the same kind of boom that Europe had, and also the U.S. before World War I.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of immigrants from Europe to Uruguay, so everything was being built up, and luxury cars and
Oh
homes, and
yeah. Yeah.
so this was like a relic from that time. And what we heard was that the family that built it, they had a lot of children, and um, they all passed away due to tuberculosis, which was a
Mm-hmm.
huge epidemic at that
Mm-hmm.
time.
It's
Uh,
around the world,
in
really.
the
Yeah.
world, yeah, and then
Mm-hmm.
more viruses also in World War I. So this whole family got wiped out, a wealthy family. It's a bit like that. There's a movie, The Others, I think, with Nicole
Oh
Kidman.
yeah, that's a great movie.
It was a
Oh
similar
yes.
kind of situation.
Yeah.
Nice old.
Uh-huh.
It was in the city, not in the country. At the time, it was probably country, surrounded by countryside, but it was
Mm-hmm.
like an old house like that. And we can go into detail, whatever you want to go into. But
Yeah,
the
just tell the story, whatever feels right.
what started to happen there was, my parents, they actually weren't doing too well at that time with each other. They were
Mm-hmm.
being, things were strained between them, and I was an only child, which probably left me even more to my own
Yeah.
fantasy and kind of exploration. And it was a time where weird things started to happen in that house, which was detected by not only myself, also by both my parents, our dogs, which
Oh wow.
actually reacted often in very, very, you know, were very reactive to this
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
really explicit reaction.
And then even the staff. And you know, we were, it was a nice life, you know, but it was sort of, my dad wasn't, you know, rich or anything, but for that time we had a staff. There was a driver and there was like a live-in lady. It was a large house with like an extra living area.
The perks of the position, really.
Exactly. And I actually had a very good relationship with the lady of the house. She was sort of a, I guess, like a, how do you say, like a butler in a way. But she was a woman. She was basically
like
doing a bit
what
of
do they call it?
The butler is usually a man.
I'm trying to recall what, like in England, what they call the head housekeeper.
Yeah,
basically.
the head.
But
not mistress.
We know we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
People watching probably know what we mean too. Yeah.
So at that time, that was a kind of, for me too as a kid, it was an interesting experience. We got to live in this kind of setup. And they had stories going back before we got there. And basically stories of a lot of activity in that house, which we started to notice. Apparitions, people seeing, often what was the father of the household. It was this fully grown man in Victorian clothing who was spotted a lot. Then a lot of chaos, especially on the third floor. There's this upper floor that had a few guest rooms, and a lot of chaos, which people presumed is coming from the children.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of different things happen. So I'm just trying to think what's the most relevant. But my mother started to really hone in onto this because my mother was always interested in the esoteric world, and she started to know these things. And my parents' relationship also kind of started to deteriorate a lot more quickly. And my father at that point even had a really long bout of depression, which was due to various things. His mother also passed away at that time, but there was a certain, that everyone felt, both my parents, there was a certain occupation in this house, like an energy occupying it that was beyond us. It was a very full house. It was a feeling of there's others here, maybe, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it just felt heavy. It felt very heavy. And that started to happen with my parents. Their behavior, their mood was shifting. And then a few notable things happened. My father had an encounter when he came home very late. He had a driver that brought him back from a function, and he saw an apparition. He came into it was like a foyer kind of, it was pretty elegant. You came in like double doors, and there's like a like a reception room, like kind of old classic reception room and parlor, and then like a staircase that goes up. And he sat down there probably to decompress, and he told me he didn't speak for several days. That was actually one of the most, for me, a bit traumatizing to see my father. He didn't speak, and then a doctor came to our house to check on him, and he was really spooked.
Wow.
And he said that he just looked up. He was sitting in the living room, and there was a man with a mustache, very pronounced mustache, a very thick collar, and what seemed to be like Victorian garb.
Oh wow.
And standing in the doorway, kind of with like only part of his face showing, like looking right at my father. And my father said that he was just, you know, he didn't know, the way I am now. He was just couldn't believe what was going on, and this man walked away. And I was about 10 or 11, so I can't remember the time frame exactly, but as time progressed, I had a friend of mine who was also really into this, and his father they were actually from England. His father was a Protestant pastor, minister, who was basically sent to Uruguay. And this kid became one of my best friends, and he was over a lot. And we started doing something which I would approach very much with caution, but we started to experiment with using a pendulum to communicate, and then also using a Ouija board, which I don't even remember where we got it from. My mother was even angry once she started realizing that we were experimenting with it.
Yeah.
And that's when things started to get really crazy, really crazy. I can't remember exactly the sequence of events, but once we started engaging with this kind of communication is when I started to, me and my friends, experience certain things which are like unbelievable until it happens, which
Yeah.
we started to have a certain form of communication, of course being skeptical, like, "Oh, you're moving it or who's doing,"
Of course. Yeah.
and then I remember several times us specifically asking, is someone here? Like, where are they? Where are they in the room? Where are they in the hallway? And there was often would lead out to the hallway. There was definitely a pattern of where these things would move, what rooms were their preference or where they would mostly
Mm-hmm.
be.
Oh yeah, for
And
sure.
one of the things I can tell you right now, which is, I was 11, 10, 11-ish. So when exactly it happened, I can't remember, but the very vivid moments are like night and day. I even have a scar on my stomach here from my dog who had a panic and scratched me up
Oh wow.
in that
Yeah.
situation. When dogs like vibrate when they're so scared and
Mm-hmm.
panicky, they're
Yeah.
shaking.
Yeah.
And one of the most intense things I've felt and noticed was the temperature change. It
Wow.
was unbelievable. We're talking about Uruguay back then. Uruguay is very temperate, a little bit like California. You don't really you have like a bit of a chilly winter,
Mm-hmm.
some rain, and then you just
Mm-hmm.
have a hot. So there's not, it's not cold.
Yeah.
There's 1 month a year where you'll see your breath.
Yeah.
And that was something where it really got intense to the point where you walk a few steps in the room. And what I remember very clearly is as soon as you approach this barrier, there's a certain like static feeling, which
Mm-hmm.
is really specific, like with the television. If you,
Oh,
the older
I know
TVs with the
I
static,
know what feeling you're talking
yeah,
about.
you've
I've
probably,
experienced it before. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
that very
Yeah.
clearly, even seeing my hair, I can really see my hair in front of my face, like
Yeah.
dangling.
Uh-huh.
And then like an ice wall, it kind of very,
Wow.
maybe like a 3-inch buffer, kind of like you can
Mm-hmm.
feel it coming on, and then you step into it, and it's very obviously cold to the point where we saw our breath.
Mm-hmm.
It
Wow.
is
That's
undeniable. It wasn't a
fascinating.
hallucination.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't. We were too
You were a
young
little,
to be drunk. We weren't taking any drugs or anything.
well,
We
and I
were
think
100%
even at
sober
10 and
kids.
11, and when you and I mean, I'm older than you, but even when you were young, these weren't things people talked about. So
Yeah,
there's things that feed our imaginations. That stuff wasn't feeding our imaginations. Does that make sense? Like
yeah,
people weren't talking, we weren't watching that. And yeah, imaginations are a thing and when they're being fed. But an experience like that is very real, I think, for most young children because we usually keep that stuff away from them
yeah,
because they're young, even at 10. Maybe not so much now because you have YouTube and stuff, but it
yeah.
sounds like a very real experience to me for sure.
It
Yeah.
was very real. It was. I remember the dogs
Sorry,
would
looking at my comments. Keep talking.
the dogs would react. I had this one. He was a schnauzer, a
Hmm.
medium, I think a medium or a miniature schnauzer. He was a very good dog. His name was Max, and he would immediately sense these things. Um, and the way the house was set up, there was the bottom was all reception and guests. The top was the bedrooms, and then the third floor was the guest bedrooms, kind of like an attic.
Hmm.
And that's where a lot of stuff went on. And then there's so many things I could say, but you can, if you want me
Yeah.
to elaborate
Yeah.
anything. But
No.
we
Yeah.
started experiencing doors slamming and opening, and that's at that point was when I was starting to get really interested to investigation. I was using 56K internet at the time. I
Yeah.
was looking at every website. I even ordered a book from some organization. I don't know if they still exist. I think it was in Virginia. It was like the
Hmm.
Ghost Hunting Institute, and they sent me this book, which took like 3 months to get to my
Nice.
house.
Nice.
And I started to really pay attention. I started to do basic experiments with like, okay, there's doors slamming.
Yeah.
I'm going to go check if there's any windows open. Like I'm going to start to have a kind of control group here. Like, okay, I even when there was a storm, I purposely told my mom, no, I'm opening all the windows. I want to see what the wind does. Will it make the doors slam? And I
Oh
started
yeah.
to take notes.
Hmm.
And I started to take notes of every account where there was, unaccount noises that you can't account for,
Hmm.
footsteps, doors slamming. Um, and that's when I slowly, me and this kid, this friend of mine, Luke was his name, from England. We both started really getting into it, And his father was this minister, and so he saw it also from a very religious angle, and
Oh yeah.
we both did from a religious scientific angle. What is going on here? And as my parents were becoming more depressed in a way, and the Mercedes, she was the lady working there, she was more kind of staying out of it. We were becoming more and more into trying to solve this case, and we
Yeah.
started to buy cheap cameras. We bought recorders.
Oh wow.
I bought copper rods as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of things, it just kept going. And another very notable thing too was this. I think this happened earlier, but with the Ouija board too, because this was just so real. We had candles lit on, in the room, and we asked the presence. It said, can you do something to these candles? And one immediately extinguished. It was almost like while finishing the question, I remember, like, can you flicker I can't remember exactly what I said.
Yeah.
Can you flicker the candle? And it just immediately extinguished.
Hmm.
And then we had another thing. We had a glass. We didn't have the actual Ouija board plastic thing. We used
a planchette, it's called.
A planchette. Yeah, we
Uh-huh.
didn't.
You can use anything as a planchette, though, really.
Yeah, we just had a
Yeah.
small little upside down glass, and
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know where I got it from. We just picked up the board.
We could just paint a Ouija board on this thing. And
Pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we asked it, to, I can't remember if I or a friend asked it to do something to the planchette, so do something. And it started going more and more in a circle. And then it suddenly just skidded off, completely off the table, like at high speed, and it hit the wall, and it broke the stem, it was like a sort of a sweet wine glass, tasting glass,
yeah,
and it snapped the thing off.
I know what you're talking about. A little teeny one.
A little teeny one. And what I noticed in that moment was, because it's hard to tell really, it's like maybe someone's just moving it, but it moved with such a force and accuracy. There's no way me or a friend just with a finger would have flicked that. So these presences were really, they were there to hang out. They were, and it did not feel bad. It did not feel like they were trying to hurt. It felt very juvenile. And I remember we got some kind of information that one of them is a girl and that she was 14. So we can only assume she was maybe a family member who died of tuberculosis. And then there was more there. So it felt very juvenile. It felt almost like there are other teenagers messing with us. They're having a good time.
Oh, yeah.
It did not feel
threatening
or malicious, but it felt heavy. It felt heavy, and it felt still kind of worrisome. But it felt like we're basically other teenagers here, and we're in their house, and they're playing around with us.
Well, the interesting thing about that, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because you talk about using a Ouija board, right? That it didn't feel threatening, because a lot of people just assume you use a Ouija board, you're bringing demons in, right?
Yeah, I said that mainly because I think you could be more at risk, but we weren't in that situation.
I think you could, but I don't think inherently that Ouija boards, and Pete will love that I'm saying this. He collects them. He doesn't believe in Ouija boards at all. But I think any of those tools, I use pendulums for all sorts of reasons, just to ask questions of the universe for myself, right?
A lot.
Yeah. And I do think they work. I have my own theories about some of that, but I do think, I thank you for mentioning that it came up. It kind of brings me to this point though, like what kinds of things do you think were happening? And you kind of answered a little bit, like you felt like there were other teenagers there that might have been interacting with you. And I had this thought when you were talking about your parents and the energy that they were creating, right? So all of that also, I believe, contributes. So you, like poltergeists, essentially, they are not entities in and of themselves.
Yeah.
Poltergeists are created by the energy of the living.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I remember.
So sometimes that's created, like you create big balls of negative. Like even when you have a harsh reaction from something, it may not have anything to do with a ghost who wants to hurt you. It might just be just kind of like bubble of bad energy that needed to dispel itself in that time, right?
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to think about, we felt like we were interacting with other kids. And the fact that you mentioned that Others movie, like maybe there's other people on the other side that are, that think you're the ghost, right? Like, I don't know. It's really so interesting to consider but the heart of it is something is happening, right? We don't understand it all yet. But something is
So
going on here.
something is going on, and I
Yeah.
like that's actually something that I wanted to talk about was that the reason why I started with that experience, because I had a few other paranormal experiences, but that was the strongest. Was
Hmm.
that one really seemed like I was interacting with a conscious entity,
Yeah.
and that was
Yeah.
what was kind of
Intelligent
frightening.
entities. Yeah.
But I didn't feel like they wanted to do me any harm. But it
Hmm.
was really like being watched in a way. It's like if I was being naughty as a kid, I'm going to go sneak my parents' bedroom or something.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
felt like, well, they might also watch. They might know what I'm doing. It felt really like a conscious energy was there. Because at the time too, when I was studying these books as a kid,
Hmm.
I started learning about the residual energy
Oh yeah.
that
Which is everywhere, even right here.
everywhere,
Yeah.
like a poltergeist
Hmm.
from people's energy or just residual energy from the people that used to be here.
Hmm.
And I really started to take that into account. That was one of the first kind of more experimental scientific ways I was approaching it. Was like, how can I try to distinguish this from like a residual haunting
Hmm.
as opposed to a real entity haunting? Uh, because I then years later with with my mother in Italy, she had a very old friend. He now passed away in Italy. He was an artist, a painter, and he had the fortune of living in this old castle in Italy in the countryside, which sounds very glamorous, but a lot of that stuff is usually lots of everyone's broke, paying taxes, and
Yeah.
but it he had a very nice like old castle basically that was heavily used in World War II
Yeah.
by
Keep talking.
oh yeah
Yeah.
uh, the Germans were there, then USGIs were there, and at a certain point, I think some German prisoners were kept there, and they were abandoned. There was some kind of a mistake where they were abandoned in this tower, which they were locked in.
Oh
And
wow.
those unfortunate men, they died of essentially dehydration and
Exposure
exposure.
and
They were locked in and they were somehow forgotten.
oh.
And that was one of the things that happened there. There was a lot of combat around that castle, like
Okay.
with the
Yeah.
American campaign in Italy.
Hmm.
And we went up there because the guy too, he was like, "You have to go up there, to my mother and me. You'll feel it." And that had a very heavy energy. It was almost like a feeling of like too much coffee or an anxiety or
Oh yeah.
sweaty or just when you're very anxious, like you can't even think or
Hmm.
you feel like you
No.
just need a breath of
Sometimes it's just literally you feel like somebody's sitting on your chest. You ever get
exactly
that?
almost
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
I'm slightly having some asthma here. I
Hmm.
feel like I drank too much coffee. I feel nauseous.
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
tired. I feel
It's a really
stressed.
specific experience for sure. Yeah.
I had that there. It felt like residual.
Hmm.
It felt a lot, but
Oh
it
yeah.
didn't feel anything was it just felt like this is the energy here and you're just entering it.
Yeah.
And then the same thing when I was starting to act, I was part of this tiny NYU short film, which we shot at the King State Penitentiary, not penitentiary, King State Asylum on Long Island, which was one of those huge asylums closed
Oh
down in the
yeah.
1980s
Hmm.
or late 80s, early 90s. And we did this horror movie. We got like some permit to go in there, and we went into the morgue, which is the classic tiles and some graffiti, and then like the
Hmm.
morgue things are open.
Yeah.
And then it went into the medical building, which had all the lobotomy rooms,
Hmm.
which was very controversial, which they're
Oh
shutting them
yeah.
down.
And very common
And
for
again,
a
the
long time.
same feeling.
Yeah.
And some of these actors too, they were completely skeptical. It's New York actor, oh, ghost, ridiculous, and
Hmm.
everyone was like, I gotta get out of here. Like it's so awful to feel
Yeah.
like one of the actors, I forgot his name, it's a while ago. He also started to say he was like a very, normal, happy, everyday guy. He thought all this stuff was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And he also just said it just feels like someone's screaming here. It just feels like he was like, I need to get out of here. It feels like
Wow.
someone's screaming, someone's like scratching on the walls. And we at some point it was like kind of when animals, like a flock of deer decides to, all run away.
Just run
We
away
all
at
like
the
looked
same
at each other
time.
and we all just bolted out
Yeah.
and caught our breath in the parking lot. And then the
Hmm.
director, we were all like 21 years old. The director's like, okay, I don't know what that was about, but like, let's try to go back in there.
Oh yeah.
Again, residual energy.
Yeah.
Maybe there might have been more lurking there because they had 10,000
Yeah.
people in that
I
asylum.
mean, my guess would be that you definitely have intelligent hauntings in a place like that too.
I definitely,
But
but that felt it felt like just a lot of residual energy.
mhm,
And then the Uruguay with my family, that was very specific. Like, no, they're
yeah,
living. They're
yeah.
not alive like us, but they're
So you sense it. I'm getting this thought right now about that difference, right? Because I 100% know what you're talking about, and it's it's static, right? Residual
mm-hmm,
is just sitting there. I would like even the energy you feel with a living or with the living or with an intelligent entity, it's still fluid. Like
yeah,
they're moving around. Like that stuff, the residual stuff is actually the stuff that feels the crappiest because it's just lingering. Like
mm-hmm,
you go into an old home that's been closed for 100 years, you feel that and you
yeah,
just walk in. And a lot of people react and think, oh my God, this is scary. There's something in here. But my response to that at this point is, oh, let's open the windows. Let's just let this stuff air out a little bit
yeah.
or flow it. But yeah, it's that static versus even an intelligent haunting is moving throughout a space. Like I believe intelligent people, the hauntings, ghosts, whatever, can move from building to building if they want.
Yeah,
But it's just, but yeah, that feeling of something just sitting in the same place for a long time without anything interacting with it is that feeling that we get. Like it just feels like a
that
weight.
feeling, or also even cumulative,
Cumulative.
cumulative,
Yeah.
um, kind of energy of many people's
Oh
experiences.
yeah.
Like in that room, they told me like a dozen soldiers were kept there in that tower. It was
Oh
basically a
yeah.
tower where they basically fried in there from the heat, and it's so you have this energy of this suffering in there.
Trauma
It's not
is
an
heavy.
individual conscience;
Hmm.
it's just their collective suffering. Where in Uruguay, just to elaborate a little bit more on the cold feeling I experienced,
Oh yeah.
we experimented at that point with we had both the Ouija board and the pendulum out. And what I really discovered with the pendulum, and yeah, more is coming back to me now. I started to develop a rapport with this 14-year-old girl. It was really strange. It was like I was like that kid at school that like tell a best friend like I'm friends with a ghost. Like it was,
That's awesome.
but
Yeah.
the pendulum
That's
I found
hilarious.
we communicate. One thing we asked was it was me, my friend Luke, and then it was another friend. He was I think his name was Lawrence. He was Brazilian. And we all went to the Uruguayan American school. So it was in
Hmm.
English. So we did American overseas
Oh yeah.
education.
Hmm.
And so we were all doing this. And we then asked the entity, uh, do you recognize the pendulum? Like, is that you? If we're asking you something, is that you responding? And it's like, yes. It was
Hmm.
like, yes. It was confirming. And then we asked more elaborately, like, so if we walk into another room and use the pendulum, are you still talking to us? And it's like, yes. And that's when I realized things would then exit the room. The hallway was always very active, almost like maybe kids running up and down the hallway.
Oh yeah.
And it must have been the kids' quarters up there. A large family. It looked very much like those would have been all
Oh
the
yeah.
little
Up in the
kids
attic
and then the
area.
teenager.
Hmm.
Uh, and I realized I can go out in the hallway with the pendulum. And that's when this ice wall happened. I would walk through it. It would end after a couple feet. And at one point, there was a moment where all this energy was coming towards us, me and my friend Luke and my dog. That's where I got this scar. Uh, it's a small scar, but it just reminds me of that.
Hmm.
And it literally passed through us. And we asked it something like, "Can you walk around?" or like, "Where are you?" And it said something like, "I'm at the end of the hallway."
Oh
And it was
wow.
really, I just remember it was really creepy. Like I didn't
Hmm.
feel endangered by this entity, but it's just,
Well,
I was like, it's really there and I can't see it, but I know it's
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
And I
It's
was looking and I didn't like really see it, but it's just kind of like if you're sensing an aura coming towards you. And then that
hmm.
same thing happened with the static, the
Hmm.
cold, and it moved through me in a
Yeah.
way. It sort of felt the same tingling was almost inside
Hmm.
and then clearly on the back, even the skin on my back felt
Oh
tingling.
wow. Yeah.
And it passed me. And then exactly like clockwork happened to my friend behind me. So there's this real feeling of it's moving. and you felt suddenly a clear energy then in another space. Oh, there's no one here right now. It's just us living people.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, no, now it's here. So it's this really sense of it's coming, it's going, it's having fun, it's playing
It
around.
does sound like it really wants you to experience it. Because,
Yeah,
I mean, you can go in places and there are clearly entities there and they don't want anything to do with you, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
No, it
but to
felt
have you when you people have those kinds of experiences and you're both having them, it wanted you to know it was there, right? Yeah.
it felt to me like, and I thought about this a lot as an adult. You know, I was thinking, felt to me that they're just attached to there. It's like this person was 14.
Hmm.
And I mentioned that person because that was the most clear, identifiable. We
Yeah.
got other, oh, there's others here. There's a small kid, there's a boy here, but this was the most clear. This, dare I say it, I feel like this one started to like develop a rapport with me
Hmm.
because it kept going on for months.
Yeah. Wow.
And to the point where I even sometimes felt, I don't want to be here. I want to just be in a room as a kid,
Right. You don't want
as a
to feel like
teenager.
someone's watching you or yeah.
But it felt like a communication. Like this person passed away as a teenager. This is all she knew.
Hmm.
This house, her family.
Did
So she's bound to this place in a
as
way.
a young kid though, did you think to ask those questions? Like what happened to you? Why are you still here?
I did not really go
Yeah.
into that.
And yeah, that makes sense to me actually
Yeah,
that you wouldn't. And maybe that's partly why that entity wouldn't engage with you because they don't want to relive that stuff. You know what I
could
mean?
be.
I don't know, but you kind of answered what I thought you would say. It was like, no, we didn't do that. We just interacted because it was cool. But
Interestingly enough, because I didn't mention to you, I'm trying to find it, but I have a folder somewhere in storage.
hmm.
It might actually be in my storage unit, um, where I have some of those old photos. We have some photos we took. There's some orbs in it,
Hmm.
but it was a film camera.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was really something or not. And it got to the point where me and my friend Luke, at this point we were 12 already. I left Uruguay. My parents left when I was 13, so this was, or just about to be 13. So this was the last year I was there, and I was really starting to grow up more. I was
Hmm.
starting to become a teenager, and we decided to really give it a shot. So we then conducted some real investigations where he came over, as a sleepover. His parents had no idea what we were doing,
Yeah.
and he ended up actually getting severely injured, and I
Oh,
had to bring him to the hospital, which not with the ghost, but also a weird thing. But and we conducted a real investigation. We had copper rods, we had the electronic voice phenomena going, like
hmm.
basically just a cassette and a
Hmm.
microphone. We were taking lots of photographs, and we did a full, like like a
That's
mission.
awesome.
We
Yeah.
He came over for sleepover. We had dinner. We hung out, and then at midnight we decided we're going to start. And that's why as soon as I find it, I'll share it with you. But
Yeah.
you'll hear my voice like, "This is Brando, and it's 1998, and on
uh,
August or whatever."
you're just a
And that's when I actually started to say verbatim the suggested things that I had in my book. It's like, like, is there and is there someone here?
yeah.
Show
Yeah.
yourself, and then why
Yeah.
are you here? And what happened was actually disappointing.
Hmm.
It kind of shut everything down. Like we
Yeah.
didn't really end up. We started
Yeah.
to just feel like we're alone in the living room at 1
Oh,
a.m.
wow.
just
That's
asking.
fascinating. Yeah.
So based on what you just said to me, maybe it they didn't like that approach. They wanted
Yeah.
to hang out upstairs. They probably saw what are they doing now? They're trying
Yeah.
to be all scientific here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of investigators will theorize that that's an issue, right?
Yeah,
Especially because there's so many of us that want to go out and we're all doing the same thing and asking the same questions with the same equipment. And they're like, whatever. They don't really want to know me.
exactly,
They just want to know if there's a ghost here.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I felt that even with these interactions in the hallways, it happened multiple times.
Hmm.
I even did it once by myself. Because I communicated by myself a few times, just in my room. And
Yeah.
one night, I remember I woke up with my bed about 2 feet from the wall. My
Oh, wow.
dog was barking. I woke up with like a jolt, and my bed was about 2 feet away. And there's no earthquakes.
Yeah.
At least not that I know of in Uruguay.
You probably would have felt that earthquake if it moved your bed that far, right? Yeah.
I did, and my dog was barking like crazy. My mom actually got up and came to check on me. And that night too, I remember I was like, with the pendulum, like, was that you? And it responded. I can't remember exactly what, but it basically was acknowledging that it was in my room.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like it was playing with me, really. So I
Yeah.
actually, over time, got more and more brave. It made me. The hallway, which I mentioned several times, was so creepy. Victoria, it was like a very nice Victorian house, kind of similar to like an American Victorian house. They
Mm-hmm.
had similar wooden constructions, like in California, those like old
Yeah.
Victorian,
Yeah.
the tall ceilings, big drapes by the window, really long, spooky hallway, and it just felt like this person was playing with me.
Yeah.
They're lonely. They were kind of like, it's another kid, is we're similar age.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to wake him up. I'm going to mess with him. And I actually got more and more brave. It gave me a sort of like comfort with this. And then, okay, I can actually go into it. It made me forever brave again about darkness and things like that.
Oh
You go to an
yeah.
abandoned house and who's going to go in there? After those, I was like, oh, as the kid, like, I would love to go in there. Like,
Like it.
I knew stuff might be in there, but I just felt like I know how to deal with this. It wasn't like some spooky mystery.
Yeah. Well, and it isn't as the more you do it, and the more you're experiencing it, the less of a mystery it is. So I get that. Like you're almost drawn into it
Yeah,
really after you've had some of these experiences. I
yeah,
mean, and they
pretty
can
much.
be. When you talk about not being scared. I mean, I've had tons of experiences where I'm startled, right?
Startled, yes,
Like a
but
person
not
could have
scared of
just
the entity. But
but like I turn and there's something there, and like if a person, whatever. But
yeah,
then you're like, wait, that shouldn't have happened right there.
yeah,
Like, what was that? Why did I experience that? That's so fascinating. I'm gonna pause for a second and look
yeah.
because of course Jonas is chiming in. Jonas says that you still owe the Virginia Paranormal Institute 99 cents for the book, along with your Columbia House music. That's funny. Uh, oh, and he also said, this is pretty cool. In high school, a classmate made a Ouija board out of scraps of paper and told me he was going to mess with our history teacher. We had an odd classroom which actually had a bathroom, blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, teacher went to the bathroom with water running for a whole last half of class. Bell rang, we left, asked the kids what's up, and he said he made the teacher balls feel like fire. That's funny. Could have been. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if Ouija boards work that way, but you're funny, Jonas. He actually has
Well,
told me that story. I mean, like he has told me that story before and was seriously flipped out about the situation because this dude was like he had a Ouija board, but he also, you know, he said he was a witch and didn't like the teacher. He's like, I'm gonna put a spell on this teacher, and he said the teacher literally like got sweaty and weird and went to the bathroom and was in there with the water running for the rest of the class. And
I
I'm
can believe
like,
it.
I right, like I think that's a thing. That's pretty crazy. That's a great story. Anyway.
And yes, I actually think I did have to even put like a money order in. I said to like those like those ads in old magazines, like send an
Oh
envelope to
yeah,
this address, and like
that's
10 years
awesome.
later, you might get the book.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about researching that house? Like now that you're an adult, have you ever thought about trying to figure out who that person could have been or those people or whatnot?
I didn't. I
Yeah.
it, it I didn't go that far, but I did revisit it a few times, not in person.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to. It's just a like 16-hour flight away.
Yeah.
But I looked at it about maybe 5, 6 years ago. I was online,
Uh-huh.
and a very interesting thing too. It had like this tower, again, very similar to like a California Victorian. Like they have this
Yeah.
little mini tower next to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where my playroom was on the third floor. That's where most of the activity.
That just sounds creepy, actually, to be
It
honest.
was creepy. Yeah, it was my basically
Yeah.
kids' room where I
Mm-hmm.
could my friends could sleep over, and that was attached to the hallway. The hallway upstairs led to that tower at the end,
Oh
and
wow.
most of the action was going on there. This was also confirmed by the staff there. They said that's the action is mostly upstairs, sometimes downstairs. And what was funny was that right when we left, we didn't have to deal with it anymore, but an engineer found there's a massive structural problem right there.
Hmm.
And so a few years ago, I looked it up again. I found some news that the tower had broken off and almost collapsed, and they had to prop it up and rebuild it.
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
one of the photos I take the most, I took a bunch of exterior photos, and there was and I'll send, as soon as I find it, I'll send it to you. The
Hmm.
tower had some orbs right around the window where my room was, right there by the tower,
Huh?
and also
Like on the
one
outside?
on the outside.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Again, it's hard because with film cameras, like, skeptics say it's just it's uh, distortions,
yeah,
aberrations from the light, and so
yeah.
forth.
Yeah, it can be hard to tell.
And then it was always very hazy. I took several photos. Some you would see the window crystal clear, and then others you would see kind of like a white wash of kind of
Hmm.
a, can't really see the window. And like right there is where a crack, right under the window, a huge crack formed. And I actually found photos online of the construction.
Oh,
There was a
wow.
small article that this house almost collapsed. So there was
Hmm.
I don't know if that has something to do with it, but that was the
Yeah.
last time I looked at it.
Well, I mean, just the earth energy that's happening, all of that, I think, contributes to how powerful the entities inside of space can be. So
Yeah.
if the earth is shifting a lot, creating energy, I don't know, it's kind of fascinating to explore. You could probably go on and do internet if you had the address and a photo of it. You could probably do some historical research just online and see if you were ever
You know what? Maybe
curious.
I'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll
And just who else, the history of who owned that home, you might be able to find something about that. It might be kind of fun, actually. I love
yeah,
to do
I
that
will.
kind of
I
research
actually
personally. So
I will
yeah,
get you those photos as soon as I find them,
yeah,
and I'll
no,
do maybe a little bit of that and
that would be awesome. Yeah, you should definitely
reanalyze
do
it.
that. That's a super cool story. What a fun experience
It
for,
was cool.
like, I mean, I think it would be fun. Some people might think it's terrifying, but
Yeah, it was not. I had I've been to other places. My family, like, most of my family's in Europe. I have family in
Mhm.
the U.S. and in Europe, and I've been to World War II battlegrounds. I've been to um, concentration camps. I felt a lot of that very heavy residual energy,
Mhm.
potentially with spirits, with entities there as well. I never felt anything, malignant towards me, but
Mhm.
I felt very heavy energies. And this was
Yeah.
something that it didn't harm me. But it made me different.
Yeah.
It made me feel I wasn't like a
Yeah.
goth or anything at school. I was just
I
kind of a
think,
regular kid, but I had this strange life that other kids
yeah, it's
would make fun of me of, or think I'm
yeah,
nuts.
well, especially, back then. I think maybe today people are more accepting to weird things, but I think it really is those physiological reactions we have that are almost uh more convincing, because my very first experience really, like, fit, like, where I had had ideas and thoughts and just around things, and it was actually in a cemetery. A lot of people believe, oh,
Hmm.
why would cemeteries be haunted? Well, why wouldn't they? I mean,
That's where in Long Island, my friend, we then went into
yeah,
cemeteries. Yeah.
yeah, and we were we drove in. It was actually in Boonville, Missouri, which is where my mom grew up. She lives there again now. And we were going to see graves of family members, right? So my parents are in the car, my younger sister, I think my ex-husband was there. I can't remember. There was a lot of us, and we're driving. And the minute I drove over the threshold into the cemetery, I was like, what is that? Like, it was the weirdest feeling. I was like, something's kind of off, right?
Hmm.
So then we pull up and we drive, and we went and visited a couple. There's a couple of great, there's different parts of the family, right? So they're on opposite sides of the cemetery. And we visited a couple here, and then just started walking, kind of shortcutting over graves and things. And I had this, I I felt like someone grabbed my lungs and squeezed all of the air out of them.
Hmm.
And but I also felt sad, and like it was just the weirdest thing, and
Hmm.
I knew immediately I needed to move. Like, I mean, obviously it felt uncomfortable, so I moved, but that was really the most striking experience that convinced me that this stuff is real and I can sense it, right? I think some people sense it more than other people do. And
Yeah.
I had to literally get off of the grass over on the dirt road and catch my breath. And I was like, that was really remarkable to me. And that was really a turning point. But all that to say that I think sometimes that physical like reactions that people have, and until you have them, you don't know what they are. But when you do,
You
you
don't.
like,
Yeah.
like when you talk about it, I'm like, I know exactly what you're saying.
No,
You
exactly. When
know?
you say too the kind of compression of the chest,
Oh
it's
yeah.
exactly right. It's not like literally like you feel someone, but it just feels like being underwater or being. It's just like
Yeah. Yeah.
you
And
can't really. Your
I
energy is under pressure. You have to
I
kind of.
honestly have never had it as striking as that first time. I
Mm,
mean, I literally, that's the way I described it to my family. I'm like, I felt like someone reached up out of a grave and went like, I mean, I
yeah.
all of a sudden I couldn't breathe at all. It was the weirdest thing. And that to me felt like somebody trying to get my attention. Whereas sometimes I get the heaviness, I'm like, oh, I can feel it. And I'm like, oh, that's just residual. It was really, it's different. I don't know. The more you have it, right, the more you
Yeah.
start to identify what it is and the messages that you're getting from things. But yeah, that's pretty fascinating.
It's very much like that, and it's what I remember too as a kid. Even then, telling it to some of my other friends and my close friends believed me, and some of
Mm-hmm.
them yeah joined me. And later, because what happened was when I was about 12, my parents ended up separating,
Oh
and it
yeah.
really started to take place in that house.
Mm-hmm.
So that I'm not blaming the house or the what was going on there for it, but a lot of things was happening to the adults. I could tell. I was
Yeah.
kind of free from it because I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, but telling friends about it, I was, it's literally like a movie.
Yeah.
It's absurd, but you see a haunted
Yeah.
house movie. Oh, I see my breath. It's cold.
Yeah.
Something touched me.
My parents are getting angry at each other.
I hear
Yeah.
kids. Yeah, my parents. I
Yeah.
hear
All of
kids'
it.
footsteps running upstairs. So spooky. And here I was. I was like, this
Mm-hmm.
is literally happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it made it convinced me of just like storytelling in general. Like there's some truth to it. A lot of these filmmakers, horror movies, haunted house, the source
Oh, for
material
sure.
is real. It's
Mm-hmm.
not.
I mean, it's always exaggerated for the moviegoer, right? But
Yeah,
yeah,
but
there's absolutely an aspect of truth.
sometimes not even.
Yeah.
It was really like hair tingling, goosebump, cold chill. It split. That was the most vivid thing I remember is just seeing my breath like you're here in
Wow.
Idaho in the winter, but indoors.
That's really fascinating. I've never had that happen. I've felt cold spots before, but I've never experienced a large enough area where I could see my breath.
It was and very periodically. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like literally like let's say we're in this space and we're talking and both our breath, you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I just move a few feet over here, it stops.
Yeah.
Or then it maybe follows me. And then 2 minutes later, it's gone, completely gone.
Yeah.
Um, it was so real in that sense. And like you see your breath, you feel the cold, like opening a freezer kind
That's
of.
really fascinating.
And
It'd be really cool to like find out what really happened in that house. I
I
mean,
would,
everything from who died, how did they die, but also to were there other families that were affected like your family was? Like that's a common theme too. People move into houses and all shit goes to hell. And then the next family moves in and all shit goes to hell, right?
things were weird. The Mercedes, the cook, she was also a cook. She was sort of the matron. Is that the right
Mm-hmm.
word?
Oh
Matron.
yeah.
Maitre d. I, I can't
Yeah.
remember these
I don't know.
terms, but
Matron could be it. Yeah.
uh, she had a son who was in his 30s or late 20s. He ended up stealing my father's motorcycle. He had a motorcycle in the garage, and he had
Mm-hmm.
a crash, and he almost died. Happened in the middle of that time.
Oh wow.
Then my friend Luke and I, we we were getting really into this stuff, and then we had a very stupid idea that we had firecrackers essentially, and we were putting firecrackers in different cans to create fireworks and little explosions.
Yeah.
And something went wrong, and he got hit directly in the forehead by a piece of metal, and he
Oh,
was gushing blood,
oh.
and it happened on the little balcony of this tower.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I saved him. I remember I had to wrap his head up. I got help immediately. He was really bleeding, like blood gushes out of a
Mm-hmm.
artery,
Yeah.
and he ended up being fine. He got a lot of stitches. His parents were really mad. Uh, but there was a lot of this
Yeah.
energy of like at any moment someone's going to fall down the stairs. And then I did fall down the stairs too at one point. I had a dark night of myself, I remember, where for some reason in that same living room downstairs where my father saw the senior man in a Victorian outfit was this like bar for guests with like
Mm-hmm.
the standard, sambuca and vodka and the
Yeah.
whiskey and the
Right.
gin. And I started drinking some of it. And I didn't go nuts. But I started to get really, as a kid. So
Mm-hmm.
I got really buzzed. And I got to the top of the stairs. I was trying to go back to that playroom on the third floor, 2 flights up, and I fell all the way down.
Oh my
And I got
gosh.
knocked out unconscious. And I woke up with two like big black blue fingers. And then the Mercedes, she found me and she was freaking out. And so there was a weird, and I was usually pretty good in life. I wasn't very accident prone, but it's like my father didn't speak for several days. Her Mercedes' son stole the motorcycle. My father forgave him. He didn't punish him, but he almost
Mm-hmm.
died on it. My friend got hit in the head, which would have been absolutely lethal if me and then we didn't apply immediate aid. He would have
Bled out.
2 or 3 minutes, and that would have been it for him. It was
Yeah.
really scary. That was actually, and I can't help but think, and then the crack, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, there's also the maybe other energy in the earth, but it just all that kind of makes it feel like like a movie, like a legit
There you
haunting
go.
movie.
You need to write a movie. This is your future. You need to tell that story in the movies,
But it was actually benevolent at the end of the day. It wasn't. There was not.
But see, I think that's a good story to tell, right? I think we all have this really bad idea that ghosts are scary and horrible. And you know what? Like, I think really exploring the human experience of that interaction and being like, you know what? It never really hurt me. I was scared. I don't know. I think you could do something really fascinating with that really informs the public
Mm-hmm.
about what this stuff really is,
True.
and might actually inform science in certain ways, of different ways to consider what's going on. I don't know. We could talk about that subject in and of itself for like 3 more hours probably if we wanted to, but
That's
uh
that's true. It actually made me enjoy horror movies a lot. And as a
mhm,
teenager, after this experience, and it gave me a real good sense of like pointing out what is real and what's not. Like some
yeah,
movies, they do it like, okay, it's scary, yeah, but that's not at all how it is. And then some movies
yeah,
really get it. Sometimes based on a real thing, and
mhm.
I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how it is. And then there's usually often the infamous stories. There's always a very dark ending
Yeah,
to it,
so often,
um,
yeah, because
or
that's
they
what,
add it into
yeah,
it to make it
mhm.
sell.
Yeah,
But
we just watched The Sixth Sense, which is one of my
it's
favorite
good. Yeah, it's
movies.
a good one.
Yeah, and I think that's a great, like, introduction to the public of what is a very real thing for people. I
Yeah,
believe there are people that see things like this little kid in this movie, and that there are dead people that aren't right. They aren't quite ready to move on, and maybe we're meant to be able to interact with them so we can help in that process. I don't know, but I'm gonna
that's
check these really quickly because we're like a little over an hour. Oh, Breezy's on there. Oh, and your friend Alex, is that his name?
yeah,
Hopefully, no Austrian police listening, but you did break into an abandoned medieval castle.
yeah. We
That
did
was
that.
spooky. That's awesome.
Alex and I.
Yeah.
That's a little side note. We broke into a little castle. We were teenagers. It was stupid,
Oh
but
yeah.
but this castle was known to have a small mural of a lady that's completely black with a monster face,
Mm-hmm.
and she was imprisoned with an iron mask
Oh.
apparently. And when she died, her spirit was seen to still called the Black Lady because she had a black dress and an iron. She was punished for some kind of adultery or something. And
Oh wow.
it was a very creepy also
That
location.
that
But
is so. Breezy says, "Have you ever had a paranormal experience that was comforting and not scary or uncomfortable?"
a
Hmm.
paranormal experience.
Mm-hmm. Is
You
that,
have
I
one?
wonder if that's my question or your question. Uh, you know what? Yes. I mean, I think that again, to the point we made a few minutes ago, sometimes things are startling, but my sister and I, um, when we were young, we were staying at my grandmother's house, and unfortunately, on my mom's side of the family, there was a lot of tragedy. My uncle died way too young. My aunt died way too young. I had a cousin who was killed in a car accident. Just my grandmother saw most of her kids die before she
Oh,
did, right?
sorry.
But my aunt Kathy, the room we were staying in, it was her room. And one night, Kelly and I were sleeping in there, and the family was there, and we both kind of sat up and looked at each other and were like, "Did you just feel somebody sit on the edge of the bed?" Yes. And we just immediately knew it was Aunt Kathy. And it was, you know what I mean? Like and I think that's partly a psychic information, like, or a trusting, but it wasn't scary. Like, it was startling because you kind of sit up and like, did I really feel that? But we confirmed it with each other. But immediately we're like, oh, Aunt Kathy, because we were sleeping
Wow.
in what was her bed when I was a youngster. And so that was
I have
that was
very
really cool.
similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have answered that the things I had in Uruguay weren't, for the adults it was probably worse, but for me it wasn't necessarily unpleasant. It was kind
Mm-hmm.
of creepy, but then I had it recently with my grandfather. He passed away last year, and he taught me hunting and fishing. So there was a
Oh,
bond.
yes.
I had a big
Yeah.
bond with him, and he passed away, and I was very sad because I was trying to see if I can maybe still see him. It was
Mhm.
very unknown. He was suffering of dialysis. He was stuck on dialysis, so
Yeah.
kidney failure, and unfortunately, it suddenly deteriorated very quickly in like 2 days. I could
Aw.
not leave California. It was the middle of the pandemic still, and lots
Mhm.
of issues, and so I was devastated by that. That I just couldn't, because I couldn't really speak to him either. He was under a lot of medication. Uh, and I remember my mom called me in the middle of the night. She was there at like 5 a.m. their time. She called me. It was like evening my time, and
Mhm.
I was alone in my house. So I was just very sad. And then I sat down in the living room. I just sat there for an hour. I think I was having a drink, and then all of a sudden, I just felt, I just heard his like voice. He used to do a lot of whistles, and he would shout "ahoy," which is
Mhm.
a Czech greeting. And I didn't hear it physically, but I heard just in my head like "ahoy," and I was like, "What?" And then the light turned off and then turned on
Oh, wow.
in my
Yeah.
living room in LA. It just turned on, and it felt really good. It
Mhm.
felt like, oh, he stopped by. And a friend who lost a family member a few months earlier, he was trying to help me. He's like, just so you know, don't worry. When he passes, he might come say hi.
Yeah.
And my friend said the same thing. His uncle died. He was very close with. And then the
Mhm.
next night, it was sort of obvious that the uncle was there. And then here, a few months ago, here in this house, I was sleeping in bed, and he had a whistle, a specific whistle, and then in the middle, it was kind of like a half dream.
Mhm. Mhm.
It was so it's not like I heard it, but I heard like the whistle, and then a hunting rifle.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
I
cool.
woke up because he loved hunting and
Mhm.
fishing. He loved animals. He wasn't like he was a very gentleman hunter, but he loved teaching me that.
Mhm.
And it came out of nowhere, and I woke up immediately and I was like, Grandpa, in my room. And it just felt like I was like in the forest for a few minutes. So it
Mhm.
felt like kind of like a dream, but
Yeah.
I just felt like he was visiting. I felt
Yeah.
like he was checking out Idaho. And because before he passed away, I told him, Idaho has a lot of amazing animals and
Mhm.
fish and trout. And
Great
that was
hunting.
the
Yeah.
last conversations I had with him. So it was like,
Aw.
so really
Yeah.
positive in that
Yeah.
sense.
I've
I
had
felt
that,
better. I
yeah,
felt more,
many times with my grandparents, where I feel like they just came to reassure me. Like,
yeah.
and so the grandfather I knew wasn't my biological grandfather, but your story about whistling makes me think of another story. So, when my daughter Emily went off to college, she went to school in Columbia, which is just 20 minutes from Boonville, where my
hmm
mother was raised and my grandparents lived. And so I drove her, across the country, dropped her off. And after I left, I went back through Boonville, stopped in front of my Nana's house, which is, you know, it's not the way I remembered it, right? The people aren't taking care of it. And I literally sat in front of my Nana's house, just cried for like 20 minutes, partly because it was my Nana's house, but also because I just dropped my kid off at school, you
Yeah.
know. But as I was driving away out of town, I'm in my car and I start hearing like whistling. I didn't have the radio on. And I was like, what is that? And I mean, it did kind of freak me out because partly you're like, am I losing my mind? So I called my mom, or at some point, my mom in that, she's like, are you leaving? She called me. I called her. I don't remember. But I told her the story and she's like, that was your papa. That was my dad. I never knew him. He died when I was 2. But she said
Hmm.
he was a whistler. He
Wow.
was always whistling. She's like, and it happened right as I was pulling away from his house, where, you know, and I was like, oh, that makes total sense to me. And it was actually kind of special because, like I said, I never really knew him. You know, he was gone before I was old enough to remember, but right away she's like, oh, that was your biological grandfather. He was letting you know.
I think there's something about because we called it our family whistle, which my
Hmm.
grandfather originated. It
Oh
was
yeah.
it was just like in a crowd, you know, where they are, you know, or hunting or dogs would always have that whistle.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about it, such a if it's something in the family or a
Yeah.
certain greeting or something, it's
Yeah.
very personal.
Yeah. So anyway, so to answer your question, Breezy, definitely there's stories out there like that. Um, I don't. I wonder if I think Jonas was responding to us talking about you making a movie about showing a different side, and he says, "Oh yeah, interesting. Who has unexplained experiences of some great, helpful, feel good stuff? Don't often hear that side. I think that's really true. Like it could be a really interesting thing to have a movie or even a documentary where you show that, oh, this was my cool story and had this really cool ending and it wasn't scary. And I don't know. Could be onto
Well, it
something
is.
there.
I think it's not supposed to necessarily be a scary,
It's
malignant thing.
it's just
It's
because it's unexplained and we don't have framework for it. I think that's going to change. I mean, I raised my kids. We lived in a house in Linwood that always had stuff going on.
mm,
So my kids growing up have a very different perspective on that stuff than I did when I was their age.
yeah,
That it's just something that happens and it can be startling, but oh, I saw this today. It's not scary to them. They just would tell me, oh, I saw
yeah.
this today, you know, like I probably wouldn't have told my parents what I experienced as a kid, but um so anyway, this has been so great. I really want to really quickly chat before we get off here about your experience at Mix,
Oh yeah, yeah,
because there's a little connection there.
yeah,
So
yeah.
my viewers know that I was able to go and do a paranormal investigation there, which actually reaped some interesting evidence. Like we actually got some EVPs and things that made absolute sense and resonated with the owner. But you were doing an improv group, right? Was that what it was? Or
Yeah, it was an an acting workshop.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Um,
meeting there, what, like on an off night, Monday nights or something?
yeah, it was an acting workshop. It's no longer running now, but we were there for a few months, Monday nights at 6 p.m., which is when they have their off day.
Hmm.
They made an agreement with the owner. And yeah, funny enough, that's one of our first conversations.
Yeah,
So I was
yeah.
at this acting workshop, and we had been doing the workshop previously at another location, at
Hmm.
the Human Rights HR. It's a building in Coeur d'Alene, another
Okay,
building in
yeah,
Coeur d'Alene.
yeah. I don't know where that is, but
And so there's the same group, and they had to move locations because of just scheduling issues. And it was a pretty positive group. So I've known them for several months, doing all kinds of scene work, different kinds of scenes, acting
hmm.
exercises. And then we moved into Mix, and it was basically the main bar dance area is what we got to use with
Hmm.
some seats and lights. And immediately from the beginning all the way till the end, every class was just grueling, just very negative. Kind of the attitude of some of the actors when you meet them outside on the sidewalk.
Hmm.
Some like this smoke a cigarette or arrive early, and everyone was just like, oh, I don't want to go in there. And then
So
every
crazy.
scene was just so negative.
Hmm.
And we're encouraged to explore everything in acting. So if
Right.
you have a angry relationship
That's what
scene,
you're
you have
feeling.
a
Yeah.
violence scene, or you have a sad, it's fine. We want to, or even if you're feeling funny or like the king of the world or you're a comedian, it's all fine. So all of a sudden, though, it was very obvious how it shifted all to negative. People were getting up there, man and woman, having horrible fights.
Huh.
Two women having horrible fights. Two men being at each other's throats. Everyone wanted to like literally murder each other in there.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where some of it was good. I'm like, yeah, that'd be good in like an abusive, family psychological thriller, or like a something really
Right.
dark and like
Yeah.
some of those drama movies about drugs and broken family, like something really heavy.
Yeah.
And the class ended because of lack of attendance, because everyone
It
was
made him
saying,
feel
the
uncomfortable.
sun's out, I want to go walk in the park. I don't want to deal with really, and it just felt like that. And then some of us started talking about the room. Even one of the actors went on stage and was warming up. It's like, this room feels suffocating. Not me, another actor said it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when we had that conversation, and you told me that, and then it
Yeah.
made all total sense for me. I
Yeah.
was like, okay, that.
Yeah. Well, and that back, I mean, there were great things we got out of our investigation, like regular clients who knew Rita and, talked with her. But the first time I went in there to actually not, it's different when the place is filled with people because I think those things disperse and
Yeah,
hide. But
we were
when
only
I,
about like 7 or 8 people.
oh yeah. So but when I had been in there when there was only two or other people besides myself, that area back behind where the stage is and the
Yeah,
pole is,
it's exactly where we had to
it
act.
it I mean I think, I even told Jonas, I'm like, it felt really weird back there. It was really drawn, and that when we talk about residual energy, the owner said he used to catch people back in that corner doing drugs, having sex, doing all sorts of stuff, that they shouldn't be doing. And that alone can create energy, right?
Yeah,
But then there's always been something else back in the coat check of that area that I've always felt when I've gone in there, which doesn't seem to match anything else. When we were on our investigation, one of the other investigators felt it too. Somebody who's just, you know, hiding in there and doesn't want anything to do with anybody else.
yeah,
So there's definitely some weird stuff. And that building's been there a little while. And as you know, there's the Veterans of Foreign Wars
yeah,
upstairs. So I think one time you mentioned that
yeah,
somebody was doing something in regards to the military and it wasn't really positive. And we got actually a lot of evidence. We got some interesting responses in our devices from the Veterans of Foreign Wars. So that was really fascinating to me, that there could be people upstairs that didn't like what, that person was portraying at that moment.
yeah. It got very. We were, like you said, a small group.
Mm-hmm.
Only our energy in there. We got
Yeah.
privacy for those hours. We were allowed to be in there. The biggest group we had maybe was 12 one night, and then a few nights we were down to 5 people.
Yeah.
And uh, one of the actors in the class is a very nice person, a good actress, but she was essentially just taking an attitude which, not to throw politics into there, but
Mm-hmm.
something that like a veteran would find quite offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't like notice something immediate, but it just still felt like, oh, she's saying this and it's getting more heavy, and
Yeah.
it's not like that necessarily made something specific happen, but that was one of the first weeks there, and it just got perpetually worse and more negative, to the point where
Yeah.
I really, and I stopped the scene even and told the teacher, I was like, I really can't focus in here. And I even said, without saying anything what I know, I said, I just feel there's like a really difficult energy in here. I feel very disconnected. I feel very, very angry.
Mm-hmm.
I feel judged. I feel confused. I feel I can't focus.
Yeah.
And he even said, well, if you can't focus, then you need to work on you're not doing it right. He was, but he was
You're like,
also, the teacher was also
yeah.
much more serious and not
Mm-hmm.
in a great mood. So it
Huh.
had a very specific effect. And it was all in that backstage area
Oh yeah.
where that dance floor is.
And like I said, so Pete and Jason, if you're watching this, we need to explore this next year. But because that, like, I kind of know where that is, but when we did our investigation, we didn't pick up a lot on that side of it, which isn't unusual, right? That's why a lot of people go back to places over and over again. But it'd be really fascinating to go in and use some of those triggers. Like, what if we start talking offensively to military people, and would that make a big deal? Now, a lot of people don't like to do that approach,
Yeah.
but for the sake sometimes of proving what you experienced, that's what you might do. I mean, that wouldn't be on my approach generally, but it'd be interesting to know if there is something that would have reacted that way.
One thing I remember specifically too, I was often drawn, especially with moments where I was really angry, in this acting work,
Hmm.
because I can be angry for an acting role, but it was just all these for everyone, all these negative things keep coming up.
Yeah.
I kept going back to that one bar stool, which is right, kind of when you look at the stage to the left, where you also said there was a story of someone that used to. I think you were telling me that someone who passed
Yeah.
away who used to always sit at his bar stool.
Yeah, the one on there was a couple of them on.
The corner,
Yeah,
like on the
right
corner
on the
side of the
corner.
bar.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I would often find myself there. I would be yelling at the actress, and I would go back
Huh.
and sit right there, right there.
Yeah. That was
Eh,
the chair where we had our lights that kept going off while we were doing.
And one light went off
Hmm.
in the middle of the scene. That one near that chair, because we
Oh,
had two
really?
stage lights that the teacher brought in like a
Huh.
equipment case, and one burnt out. And then we had to finish the class with only one light, so everyone had like a half shadow on their face.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, we just had some of those motion sensor lights that we'll put out, and we'll stand away and we'll ask questions and say, "Hey, turn this light on and off."
Wow.
It happened multiple
There
times.
and mix. Wow.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Just to wrap up, like as an adult, what I often thought, going back to Uruguay or right now at Mixed, the most recent experience is I just wonder if it really is an entity that's consciously there. It
Hmm.
makes me think, what are they? Do they have the full conscious that we have? Are
Yeah.
they as alert, as awake? And if so, I thought, what do they want? And I figured maybe because we were actors in this space, we're
Hmm.
doing an exercise where we're revealing, we're expressing painful truths or
Hmm.
things we want to explore or express. And so I started to think, even like that 14-year-old girl, I was like,
Hmm.
maybe it's just like people. They're just there at the
Absolutely.
bar, be like, oh, these living people get to come here and express themselves. Well, what about me?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
don't forget about me. I'm here.
yeah.
That's what it felt. It didn't feel like anyone was
I
trying to hurt us. It just felt
I
like,
think I think those questions are what drive all of us that do this.
yeah,
Like, I just want to know more. What am I interacting with? And I really do believe, there's residual energy and that's something you feel, but I think that those intelligent ghosts that for whatever reason are stuck are just humans in a different form. So they have emotions, they have reactions to things, all of that, that are a big deal now. And if the reason that they're stuck here is because of trauma, we all know how trauma plays out in our lives. It makes everything else worse, right?
yeah,
So anything can feel really big and explicit because of that trauma. So those reactions become bigger. They their emotions are bigger. They might scratch you. It's not because they're a demon. It's just because I need you to know I'm here and I want you to know that I'm hurting. I don't know. That's
yeah. You were
tends to be
talking on your
my.
last show. You were mentioning that sometimes they really want to get your attention.
Oh yeah,
It
yeah,
might
yeah,
not
yeah.
be intentional to scare you.
Oh yeah. I don't think it is. I mean, my belief is it's probably a lot of work to try to interact with people from the other side.
I think
So
so too.
sometimes
Yeah.
whoosh is what happens and you might go flying down the stairs, but not because they wanted to hurt you, because that's just how it happened.
There's also that theme in horror movies. Often that they need a living person. They need, like, they want
Yeah.
to possess someone, which I didn't feel in these cases. But I also believe that besides just trauma or maybe the location is a place that they want to stay, it seems to me like they have to jump through a lot of hoops to manifest themselves,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
even travel. That's actually something I always wondered, because I heard of stories where people get followed. They move
Mhm.
houses and they get followed and
Mhm.
followed. So I always thought like they need some kind of a vehicle. It's either a building or a structure, or it's maybe a specific person. I think not to sound ridiculous, but they're almost like underpowered in a way. Like
Oh
they
yeah.
need, it's a
Yeah.
lot of effort for them to manifest or to travel or
Mhm.
move.
It requires energy, right? So I mean, even in this like just mystic world, people, you can do meditations and things, and there are people. Do you want some more whiskey? Help yourself. That will there'll be attachments that you'll pick up, like pieces of other people's souls that you've encountered during your life. I'll take a little more. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of how they, if they feel drawn to you for whatever reason, it's just a little bit of an energetic attachment, and it may not be their whole being. I
Yeah.
don't know, I could talk about this stuff. I mean, honestly, everything segues into
it could
like
be a
40
whole,
million other things, but anyway, this has been awesome.
yeah,
Yeah, we
thanks a
should
lot. It's a lot of
probably
fun.
wrap it up, but this is really fun. You should come on again, and we'll just explore some of these other crazy ideas.
Sure, I'd love to
because
find my material from when I was a
yeah,
kid and then show
yeah.
you all of that.
No, so you guys will, once he finds that, I'll post them digitally on the page. But thank you,
Thank you very
Swanja.
much.
You
It's a
guys,
lot of fun.
thanks for those of you who tuned in tonight and following later. Make sure to like, subscribe wherever you are, and if you enjoy these episodes, you can share them with your friends. But yeah, stay weird, you guys. Your friend says UFOs next session. Cool. Alex, you need to go back and watch previous episodes because we've been there, done that.
Oh,
saying.
yeah.
All right. Thanks, you guys, for watching. Have a great night.